Good evening, I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Our top stories for tonight. China's exports beat expectations after US tariff truce, and Iran warns it will respond to return of UN sanctions. More coming up on AWANI International. China's export growth beat expectations in June, driven by strong demand from non-US markets and a brief easing of trade tensions with Washington. According to the General Administration of Customs, exports rose to 5.8% year-on-year to $325 billion, up from May's 4.8% and ahead of Reuters' 5% growth forecast. Imports also grew by 1.1%, the first increase this year, up from a drop of 3.4% in May and beating the 0.3% growth forecast. China also ended the first half of 2025 with a record trade surplus of $586 billion, while shipments to the US plunged 16.1% in June. Following an even sharper 34% drop in May, Chinese exporters made up ground elsewhere. Exports to ASEAN surged 17% year-on-year, helping cushion the blow. US tariffs on Chinese goods have eased to around 55%, down from a peak of 145% in April. The two also managed to secure a trade agreement at the end of June, following a decision to slash duties on each other's goods in May. However, tensions remain high after Washington announced a fresh wave of tariffs on trading partners, including a 50% levy on copper, set to take effect on August 1st. Beijing had set a growth target of around 5% for the year, but many analysts saw it as an ambitious goal, warning that Trump's trade war could lead to a sharp slowdown in the second half of the year. Iran warns it will respond if United Nations sanctions over its nuclear program are reimposed. However, the country's foreign ministry spokesperson did not elaborate on what exact actions Tehran might take. This comes as Europe considers triggering the snapback mechanism to restore UN sanctions if no nuclear deal that meets European security interests is reached. Iran has called the move baseless and says no date or location has been set for new nuclear talks with the US. The snapback mechanism is a process under the 2015 nuclear deal that reinstates UN sanctions if Iran fails to meet its commitments. Western countries have accused Iran of trying to build a nuclear weapon, which Tehran denies. The US withdrew from the 2015 agreement in 2018 under President Donald Trump, who said it was too weak. Trump, now in his second term, has called on Iran to return to negotiations following last month's ceasefire that ended a 12-day air war between Iran and Israel. We have more after the break. Stay tuned.
Berita hebat untuk pelanggan Astro Movies dan Epic Pack. Prime Video kini termasuk dalam langganan anda.
Who's the action hero now?
Anda boleh stream 24 jam sehari. Pelbagai filem kesukaan anda.
Amazing.
Janab Hindustan.
Amazon Originals.
It's big.
Are you ready?
Serta K-Favorites terkini. Semua ni dan banyak lagi.
Kalian pilih video siapa yang akan tayang.
Pelanggan Astro Movies dan Epic Pack. Stream Prime Video sekarang dengan Astro. Anda juga boleh langgan Prime Video melalui aplikasi My Astro.
Di dalam setiap berita yang dibawa, konteks amat penting. Kami sentiasa membawakan yang tergempar dan terkini. Pastikan Astro AWANI menjadi pilihan anda, tidak kira di mana sahaja anda berada.
A 30% tariff threatened by US President Donald Trump on EU goods could effectively shut down trade, says EU Trade Minister Maros Sefcovic. The warning follows Trump's announcement that the US will impose a 30% tariff on imports from the European Union and Mexico starting August 1st.
So practically it prohibits the trade. So if you're talking about 30% or 30% plus, there will be a huge impact on trade. It will be almost impossible to continue the trading as we are used in a transatlantic relationship. And if you look at the impact this would have, so I have to say the transatlantic supply chains would be heavily affected on both sides of Atlantic.
Šefčovič said both sides are working toward a mutually beneficial trade deal despite rising tensions. Trump revealed the new tariffs in letters to EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen and Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum, which were posted on his Truth social account on Saturday. He added that if the EU or Mexico retaliates, the US would match their hike by adding it on top of the 30%. The EU responded by pausing its countermeasures against the United States until early August to prepare its options.
South Korea says it may be able to reach an in-principle trade deal with the US by the August 1st deadline. Trade Minister Johan Koo also signals that Seoul may be open to greater US access to its agricultural markets. Yo last held high-level talks with US officials last week. He said South Korea was seeking to avoid unfair US tariffs on sectors that could undermine industrial cooperation with its main security ally and trading partner. Seoul is racing to reach a compromise before a 25% tariff takes effect on its exports by August 1st. Negotiations got off to a late start following the election of new President Lee Jae-myung last month. South Korea recorded a $55.6 billion trade surplus with the US in 2024. An increase of 25% from 2023, driven by strong car exports. Its effective tariff rates remain near zero under a free trade agreement first signed in 2007, then revised in 2018 during Trump's first term. China's top diplomat Wang Yi says ties between Beijing and Moscow remain stable, mature and strategically significant, following talks with Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov in Beijing on Sunday. The two discussed their relations with the US and the outlook for ending the war in Ukraine. They also exchanged views on the Korean Peninsula and Iran's nuclear issue. Wang added that Russian President Vladimir Putin's upcoming visit to China is a top priority in the months ahead. Lavrov is in China to attend a meeting of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization's foreign ministers. He and Wang recently met US Secretary of State Marco Rubio on the sidelines of the ASEAN Foreign Ministers meeting in Malaysia to discuss the issue of Ukraine. The US has been a strong critic of Russia's slow progress on peace talks and has also voiced concerns over China's role in the conflict. China and Russia announced a no-limits partnership in February 2022, just days before Moscow sent thousands of troops into Ukraine. The US will send various pieces of sophisticated military equipment to Ukraine, says President Donald Trump. This will include Patriot missile defense systems, each costing around $3 million.
I haven't agreed on the number yet, but they're going to have some because they do need protection. But the European Union is paying for it. We're not paying anything for it, but we will send it. It'll be business for us, and we will send them Patriots, which they desperately need, because Putin really surprised a lot of people. He talks nice and then he bombs everybody in the evening. So there's a little bit of a problem there, and I don't like it.
Trump's plans to send advanced weapons to Ukraine reverses his earlier stance on arming Kiev. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said last week that US military supplies had resumed as Russian aerial attacks intensified. Separately, Zelensky has submitted a bill to Parliament to extend martial law until November 5th, with a vote expected next week. Ukraine has been under martial law since February 24, 2022, when Russia launched a full-scale invasion. US immigration officials may now deport migrants to countries other than their own, with as little as 6 hours' notice, according to a new Trump administration memo. The memo obtained by the Washington Post says migrants can be removed to countries that have pledged not to persecute or torture them without further procedures. The US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, otherwise known as ICE, said this policy applies to those in exigent circumstances as long as the person has been provided the chance to speak with an attorney. In other cases, immigrants will get 24 hours notice. The new directive followed a June Supreme Court ruling that lifted restrictions requiring fear screenings before third country deportations. The Trump administration argued that this approach could speed up the removal of migrants, including those with criminal records. But human rights groups have called it dangerous and inhumane, warning migrants could be sent to countries where they face violence, have no ties, and don't speak the language. US President Donald Trump hopes a Gaza ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas will be reached next week. His remarks come as negotiations between Israel and Hamas continue in the Qatari capital, Doha.
Gaza, we are talking, and hopefully we're going to get that straightened out over the next week. Let's see what happens.
Washington is backing a 60-day truce involving phased hostage releases, Israeli troop withdrawals from parts of Gaza, and talks to end the conflict. Trump earlier said Israel had accepted the conditions of the deal, which was presented to Hamas by Qatar and Egypt. Hamas had reportedly responded positively, saying it was ready to move forward with negotiations and a hostage exchange. The Israel-Hamas conflict began in October 2023, with more than 57,000 Palestinians killed so far. There have been 2 temporary ceasefires in November 2023 and January 2025 since the conflict began, but a lasting peace remains a distant goal.
French President Emmanuel Macron warns that Europe's liberty is facing its greatest threat since the end of World War II. In a speech to armed forces in Paris, he outlined plans for a big increase in defense spending over the next few years.
Macron called for France's defense spending to rise by 3.5 billion euros next year, followed by another 3 billion in 2027. He said the world was witnessing the return of nuclear power and the proliferation of major conflicts. Referencing the threat from Russia, he denounced imperialist policies and annexing powers. The doubling of the budget by 2027 comes 3 years earlier than originally planned. France's defense budget stood at 32 billion euros in 2017. Macron's proposals would still need approval from the French government. Prime Minister François Bayrou is expected to outline next year's budget on Thursday.
Cambodia's military will begin conscription of civilians in 2026. Prime Minister Hun Manet made the announcement today, citing rising tensions with Thailand as the reason for activating a long-dormant enlistment law. Cambodia's parliament approved the law in 2006, which requires all Cambodians aged 18 to 30 to serve in the military for 18 months. However, it has never been enforced. Hun Manet said the service period would now be extended to 24 months. He also pledged to increase Cambodia's defense budget. Tensions between Cambodia and Thailand have escalated since May, when a territorial dispute boiled over into cross-border clashes that killed 1 Cambodian soldier. It has also triggered a domestic political crisis in Thailand, where Prime Minister Paetongtarn Shinawatra has been suspended from office following a leaked phone call with Hun Manet's father, former leader Hun Sen. Thailand already has military conscription for young able-bodied men who enter a lottery to determine whether they have to serve. That report wraps up AWANI International tonight. Stay tuned for our reports on the rivalries, strategies and the shifts behind the power affairs driving the new global order. Visit international.astroawani.com for more. Be sure to follow our social media accounts at Power Affairs. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi. Thank you for watching. Good night.